Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to BizTown, your achievement of South Central Pennsylvania. My name is Victoria Conner, and I'm the CEO of the York County Bar Association and Bar Foundation, but I'm also the partnership chair for Legal Legacy, and I'm so pleased that all of you can make it today. It has been a crazy week already, and it's only, what day is it?
Wednesday.
So it's early yet. But for those of you I haven't met and who are new, welcome to your Legal Legacy, getting the conversation started. And I want to first thank Diana and also Jen Galloway, who is not here today, for organizing today's program. Already, I think we've knocked it out of the park with our attendance. I just want to say, as partnership chair, thank you all for being valued members. There's a few of you who are not members, and I just wanted to review a little bit about the things that Legal Legacy brings to you. Like the networking that you're doing today and the professional development opportunities that we have, there's more. You can also get a mentor. So if you have a development program that isn't exactly as strong as you'd like it to be, we will pair you with an experienced development officer who can review what you're doing and identify the gaps that you may have. So please let us know. We have a form here. Kendall is your go-to person for everything in Legal Legacy. So this is the form to request a mentor. And this is the form also to join if you are not yet a member and would like to. Other things that we have to offer. We have this fabulous opportunity for you to use our booklet and customize it with your organization story. Remember, Legal Legacy is a non-competitive group. We are all here working together to make York County stronger by encouraging people to leave their gifts to whatever organization they choose here in York County. So that's the whole gist behind what we're doing, and we'd like to be really successful. As Brad Jacobs always says, we don't want that stagecoach going up to Harrisburg with the money that should be left here in York County. So please, encourage others to join Legal Legacy. If you know of some that are not in this booklet, in this fabulous booklet that gets into the hands of every financial planner and attorney who's a member, this gets circulated in their offices for their clients to see. So that's why you want your name in here and your organization, because the clients get to see these books. So that's my pitch for joining Legal Legacy, and I'm going to turn the program over now to Diana, and she's going to introduce our panels. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to BizTown. Tom Russell, the president of Junior Achievement, is going to come in at the end of our program and just tell you a little bit about BizTown, and he's happy to give everyone a tour if they'd be interested. Today's program is going to be on getting the conversation started, and we thought Jen Galloway, who's at the beach, by the way, instead of being here, thought it would be a good idea to actually do some role playing with talking to clients about charitable giving. So today we engaged the help of a few professional advisors here in town, and we're going to do some role-playing scenarios. We're going to start with kind of post-mortem charitable giving, and we're going to have Mac Brillhart, attorney with Stock and Leader, is going to be interviewing his client, Damian Lynch, who is in real life a certified financial planner and my partner at the Financial Advisory Group. So they're going to do a couple of scenarios about talking with a client about post-mortem charitable giving. We'll then have some questions and answers, and then Kevin Smith, who is with Smith, Mayer, and Little Wealth Management Group, and also a certified financial planner, is going to be interviewing me as his client, and we'll be talking about charitable giving opportunities while we're all still living. Okay, and again, in between we'll have questions and answers. One thing that I'll caution is we're all professional advisors, not professional actors, so please bear with us. I was going to have George Clooney here today, but he's a parent now, so Kevin is here instead. So we're going to start with Mac and Damian.
Damien is a good friend of mine, so this might be a little awkward.
And we'll start, the first scenario we're going to go through is I'm the surviving spouse coming into meeting with my attorney just to update the estate, and I'm walking in sort of blind as to what happens next. Is this where you say action or something like that?
Action,
Is that
right?
how it works,
Live
right?
mic.
Okay, good, good.
Mr. Lynch, tell me why you're here today, please.
My wife recently passed away, and I'm just sort of looking for what to do and what next steps to take.
Tell me a little bit about your family and your background.
Family-wise, I have 3 remaining children, all pretty close to me. That's from a relationship standpoint, are scattered around the country, and then 5 grandkids that are also, again, very important to me, ones that I want to keep in touch with. From a background standpoint, was married for a long time and want to make sure to some extent that I can also find ways to honor my wife as well going forward.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss. Could you give me a picture of what's in your estate and your wife's estate?
And by from estate, what do you mean by estate?
Well, we use that term both in the context of someone that's living or someone that's passed away. So what do you and your wife own by way of real estate, bank accounts, vehicles, retirement accounts, life insurance? Give me a picture of what the 2 of you own.
Okay, we have a house that's paid off. We also have 2 cars still at this point. Have about $60,000 to $70,000 in just liquid money at different banks around York. We also have about $100,000 in an IRA or retirement account. And then we also, probably the biggest asset is we have about 1,000 shares of York Water Company that was purchased by my wife about 40 years ago. That's basically everything that we have.
Well, let's start with your wife's estate. So in most contexts, when a spouse passes away, there's not a lot of legal work that needs done initially. When a spouse inherits from another spouse, there's no Pennsylvania inheritance tax due at the death of a spouse. There's no federal estate tax due at the death of a spouse. So your inheritance, whether it's by owning an asset jointly with your wife or inheriting it through a beneficiary designation, is not taxable.
Okay.
But of course, what we need to talk about now is that you are moving forward with children and grandchildren. What is it that you see happening with your assets and your estate when you pass away?
Well, I think it's my main concern is I want to make sure first I have enough for me. So I think that's the first priority for myself, is to make sure I'm okay. After that, I'd say, again, I would like something to pass on to the kids, but I think it's also important that my wife, she worked in communications and broadcasting, and I'd love some portion, I've talked to her in the past about, to leave some type of legacy in that field, maybe something, again, along the lines of an NPR, to be able to have some funds somehow go to something, but I'm not sure how that's possible. But again, I'd rather do that after my passing, make sure I'm okay first before anything happens during my life.
So let's stick to that concept for a second. So there's different ways to give to an individual, to a charity during life. We call inter vivos gifting, or at your death. Do I understand that your interest, whether it be for your children, grandchildren, or a potential charity, you want those to occur at your death and not during life?
Correct.
Okay. And let's also parse out the different types of estates that folks have. We have what's called a probate estate and a non-probate estate. So your probate estate would be those assets that are individually titled but not beneficiary designated. So let's back up on that. For instance, a piece of real estate. You now own that real estate individually titled, and there is no beneficiary designation for real estate or for vehicles or for personal property. So those items that are not beneficiary designated come under your will, whereas items that are beneficiary designated pass by that specific contract. So whether it be your IRA or a life insurance policy, a financial account, those can end up in what you would call 2 different buckets.
So I can have my will say everything goes to one place, but I can also have my IRA to go to somewhere different.
Exactly. So let's dive into that a little bit more. You talk about wanting to honor your wife. She worked in broadcasting communications. And so when we look at assets that you might be interested in driving to a charity, we can also try to dovetail your plan to achieve some tax savings. So an IRA specifically is an asset that's not only subject to inheritance tax. When you pass away and you would leave that IRA, for instance, to your children or grandchildren, they pay Pennsylvania inheritance tax. They would also have to pay federal income tax as they withdraw pieces of the IRA that they inherit. So that's an asset that would incur 2 taxes, if you will, and that's a great area to start planning with charities.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you have any questions about that?
No, I guess this inheritance tax, is that, how much is an inheritance tax if I'm giving it to the kids? What is that?
So we have 2 different death taxes in our country. One is imposed by the Commonwealth, if you're a Pennsylvania resident, and the other by the federal government. So in Pennsylvania, there's no threshold. Whether you die with $1 or $1 million, that's taxed, and the percentage of tax relates to the beneficiary that inherits it.
Okay.
And so just as you would inherit from your wife, there's no spousal inheritance tax. Your children and grandchildren inherit at a rate of 4.5%, siblings at a rate of 12%, all other individuals at a rate of 15%. But the loophole there, if you will, is a charity does not pay Pennsylvania inheritance tax.
So theirs would be 0.
Theirs would be 0. They would be like a spouse.
Okay.
The other death tax would be a federal estate tax. That has a threshold right now, roughly $5.5 million. And so
I'm okay.
you seem like you're okay on that one. So that also, tax is imposed at that threshold, but of course there's no tax between spouses. And of course charities are also exempt from that tax.
Okay.
So have you thought at all about what pieces of your estate you would leave to your children and grandchildren versus what you might create for a charitable interest for your wife?
No, to me, the most important is that they each get something. To me, probably, if it sounds like if there's ways that I can pay less to taxes in any way, that's the route that I take. As long as assets get to my children, grandchildren, and the charity, the way it's structured doesn't matter to me.
So one of the things I would encourage you to do before you come back for a second meeting would be whether you sit down with your accountant, your financial advisor, to look at the picture of your assets. That IRA is a great vehicle to use to avoid both taxes, and come back to our second meeting with maybe somewhat of an apportionment of what you would piece out for a charity. Maybe do some research as to what sort of local charities there are that exist that relate to the broadcast field.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I don't think I have any other questions there, Mr. Gohart.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So we were going to stop. You don't need to clap.
No.
Please don't clap. So we were going to stop between each hypo and ask the crowd if they had questions, or maybe you could do it better than us. Is there something that you thought of that you think we should have incorporated, or perhaps have a question about what we discussed?
I have one thought, and that was if the question could be answered, if you decide to give your children cash in advance of your death, are they going to avoid inheritance tax? And if you give them an outright gift, can they avoid income tax on that gift?
Well, it depends what sort of gift it is. There's a 1-year look back in Pennsylvania on gifts that are made prior to death. So there's a clawback. There's a little exemption to it, but the clawback is, of course, if you're on your deathbed and you make a gift to whoever that is, if that individual that receives the gift prior to date of death is not tax exempt, there's a clawback to tax that gift. I think one of the things we really wanted to encourage during this is not to get into real sophisticated techniques, but to talk about the fact that advisors and development folks that work with advisors should be encouraging the discussion. If advisors aren't bringing up the ideas of local charities, then the client might not even have thought of that. One of the things I try to do is, no matter how many levels of beneficiaries I have, spouse, children, sibling, aunts, uncles, there's no harm in having a charity named as a sort of end-all beneficiary in a document. So we try to have it, at my office, we try to have that discussion with every client to encourage charitable thinking. If you don't ask, you don't know.
And I think it's a lot of clients or donors, however you want to view them, right? It's a lack of understanding of not knowing what questions to ask. So a lot of times it's like Mac did, is getting it out of me, right? I don't know what an estate. A lot of people, if you ask them what an estate is, they really, it sounds like a big word. I don't know what it is. Again, having that conversation, whether it's with an attorney or even with a charity, of here's are the ways you can donate to us, right? Where most people just think of, oh, it's only during life. And learning things like that IRA distribution. Don't want to steal thunder from you guys, but there's other things you can do as well. So I think it's just that educational aspect of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk at all about his resources to live?
Well, he made it clear he did not want to do any sort of lifetime gifting.
No,
So
I was more concerned about, you talk about Social Security
That's true. That's true. Well, I think we would. This is the attorney, so I think when I won't again step on there. It's usually in that role, the financial planner would take over that role of making sure the assets are sufficient. But the key here was, to me, it was I don't want to give anything away now. I probably couldn't. You're right. But also just to make sure it's at the end. But again, I think that role would be more the financial planner to look at that from that aspect.
One of the other things I'd mention is that when we speak with clients about charitable giving, I'm from York, so I can say this, there's certainly a bent to keep money in York. And so folks will name charities and perhaps name the national mother entity and not the local arm. I think that's important to document for the advisor, and also how that money's used. I mean, you as the donor can, and probably a lot of folks that work at nonprofits don't want to be hamstrung by having to use it a certain way, but the donor has that right to dictate whether it's for day-to-day management or operations versus a particular named fund or a particular cause. So I think advisors should be wary of making sure the donor understands you are in charge, you can dictate where your money ends up and what it's used for.
Would his age have anything to do with any different recommendations versus if he's 50 or if he's 70 or 90?
How old are you saying I am, Vicki, by the way?
Less than 50.
Yeah, I'll take that.
I mean, I try to start the discussion with that basic concept again of, do you want to make charitable gifts during life or death? And I mean, in my mind, I'm in my late 30s. I have little kids, I have lots of bills, and so that the age can dictate the answer to that. But I think that question starts with, when do you want to give?
Ready to move
Go on to the second one.
So this is just a second scenario we'll do, and then we'll turn the floor over. Different scenario here where it's a married couple, but only the husband is in with no children. Go with action again.
So he's not here with his wife, we notice, which is an issue.
Yes.
Sort of joking. All right. I see that you're not here with your wife today, and if I'm going to do estate planning for you and your wife, of course, we wouldn't prepare any documentation or have any documentation signed until your wife is with you.
Correct.
But having said that, tell me a little bit about your family scenario, whether you have children. Talk about that first, please.
Married with no kids, with no plans on having kids. So really the family situation is pretty simple. No really close relatives either. It's just my wife and I, and basically again from a local, it's just the two of us.
And so have you and your wife talked at all? I'm assuming that when one of you passes, you would leave your entire estate to your surviving spouse.
That's the only discussions we've had, and we're not, because of that, I'm not sure if we really need a will or not. It's just, we just want everything to go to each other, so is there an issue with that?
Well, there's definitely one issue that jumps out, which is if you pass away without a will in Pennsylvania, whereas your spouse would still inherit because you have no children, there is an actual statute, a law that dictates where all of your assets would go when both of you pass away. It's called the intestate statute. And that would funnel money back to a sort of a hierarchy of children, parents, siblings, and down the line. And so if your siblings or aunts and uncles or parents are not where you hope to have your assets end up, then the will would dictate otherwise.
Okay. Because I think, I'd rather have it go to different places than that side.
So when you say different places, it sounds to me like you don't have a particular individual in mind. Is that right?
Correct. No, it wouldn't, I think from what we've talked about, it's more of we have a very big appreciation of theater and culture. So we'd like to have some portion of the estate, and not sure how or who to, but to do something of our assets to, once we're both gone, to some type of theater or application of the arts locally.
And so how old are you and your wife?
I am 38 years old, and my wife is 38 as well.
And so a lot of your past time is spent at theaters and
Theaters,
dining,
correct.
and do you do most of that work or work enjoyment in York, Lancaster? Where do you go?
Mostly in York.
Okay.
Again, like everything local.
And are you involved as a board member, as a donor, volunteer your time with any particular group in York?
Not necessarily. We don't donate much, and again, our intention is to live now and make sure we have the assets we have, that we're okay. And then if we're going to donate anything, it would be post, or once we're both gone.
And so there are conceptually different ways to have money inherited when you pass, whether it be under your last will and testament or by beneficiary designation. That's a separate contract for the asset. And so giving to charities, a local charity, for instance, would exempt that amount that passes from both federal estate tax and Pennsylvania inheritance tax. Questions about that?
No, I think it's interesting that, so if we don't have anything in writing about this, then we have no way of getting it to the charities or to the organizations.
One thing you'll notice about Pennsylvania's intestacy statute is nowhere is charity or an organization, charitable organization mentioned in that statute. And so if you do have a love for the arts or theater, that money is not going to end up in that sense without direction in writing.
Okay.
So that was a short one.
Yes. And I think the point on that one, I think we'd say is, and just from the planning standpoint, the last thing people ever want to do is get a will. No matter how many times you tell them to get one, it's the last thing they do. But I think people understanding, people just don't think, they'll think in their mind, I want the money to go to X, to junior achievement, but never think through, oh, I have to do something to make that happen. And I think it's finding a way, whether it's from your perspective or from the advisor's perspective, to get, they might want to do it, they just need to be urged to do it because it's the last thing they want to do. It's not a fun discussion to sit down. That's why my wife's not here. We don't like talking about it.
And people do have this preconceived notion that when they come in and meet you, that their will quickly be used after they leave.
Yes.
It's a real thought. Okay.
All right.
Can I just go to the question, what would you say the average age is of a person who comes in to do their will? I mean, do you get many 38-year-olds?
I don't know if I would define it as many. I would say that the bulk of the estate planning clients we see are over 40, 45. We certainly see a lot of elderly people because they're approaching that age when their will would be used. We also see, I see folks not in age groups, but in sort of life circumstances. So folks getting divorced, folks getting married, folks having children, folks having grandchildren. So life circumstances to me drive folks coming in to do estate planning more so than their age. It could be that they inherited, their parents passed away and now it's sort of keen in their mind. A lot of times we have folks that come in to get their first will done when they have babies, really simply to name a guardian in the will to take the children at their death. And then I'll often find that they'll come back sometime later when their children are no longer minors, and oftentimes now they want to remove minor clauses from wills, but they also want to start to name their adult children as their own executor or their own POA. So I see it more in a life stage than a particular age. Good question.
Do you have any suggestions for how a charity can talk to their constituents about the need for doing a will and give them kind of the emphasis or the understanding of what it can do for them?
I mean, one pops to mind is that folks that your major donors that are giving during their life, if they don't understand the concept that you are benefiting from that and they're keeping you alive, but when they pass, their gift doesn't continue, is explaining that you're a lifetime giver, but that lifetime giving will end when you pass, and the way to continue to supplement that and keep that relationship going is through a will or a trust, and just encouraging them to see an advisor to get that done.
And I think a lot of people just don't even think about that. It's not even a thought. So just putting that out there of, there are ways that you enjoy giving to us during life, that, and it's something as simple as if ever, I'm sure with all of you, if every person just put your charity as a 1, 2, 3% beneficiary on it doesn't have to be a big amount, right? That little bit makes a difference. But I think most people just don't even think of it. It's not even in their head that it's something. And I think one other quick topic is, if you look at people who, right, if you have kids, it's pretty simple. I just want the assets to go to the kids. People without kids don't get the will because it's more complicated, right? You have to do a lot more thinking involved. But that's also who you want to, that's who the target could be a lot of times. So that's, again, getting them to get that will and understand that the only way to get the assets to go to you is to have something in writing to make it happen.
I've heard this both ways for attorneys when someone comes to you, like if Damien said he likes theater, able to, I've heard that you can and that you can't suggest nonprofits that support the arts and stuff.
Well, I mean, as a rule of thumb, I think advisors need to be careful on identifying charities that they serve, on a particular board. I think disclosure is big, so you want to make disclosures to the client. And I'm one that I try to never give one, whether it's a referral to a financial advisor or a charity, that you're not giving a single name. Now, if there's a real particular interest in a real small community, that can be difficult. But if a client is asking for charitable groups that are local, I think I would always disclose up front if I'm involved. I would try to give multiple names. And I would also tell the client to do their own research. Whether you have a large nonprofit like the Community Foundation that has special interest funds, or with the internet and technology now, I don't think it's real difficult to look up in a community a particular interest and come up with multiple names. But I agree, advisors should be careful in giving out ideas in that regard.
I just want to applaud you, however, that you raised the question. There are a lot of attorneys that don't even raise the question.
Thank you.
Matt, do you advise folks about keeping their life insurance current, that it's separate from?
Yeah, I tried to hone in on that with Damien. I think one of the things that I spend a little more time on with clients, and I think estate planners in York do this and general practitioners don't. I'm a great example of, I own a house with a mortgage, I own a car with a loan, I got law school debt. I don't have a lot of probate money. So if I died tomorrow, my beautiful wife over here would inherit very little, right, under my will. But she would, my life insurance policy, my retirement accounts are really the meat of my estate. And so arguably, you could say that my beneficiary designations are more important than my will. My money is controlled by beneficiaries. So one of the things I tell folks is, when you come back to sign your will, I would ask that you come back with blank beneficiary forms for each life insurance policy, for each retirement account, and we will review those. I won't charge you for it, we'll review them, and I would like copies of those in the file. And if the client says no thanks, then I write them a CYA letter that says you chose not to do your beneficiary designations, so that if their kids come back on me, I have some coverage. But I think that the update of those policies, those beneficiary forms, is crucial. People don't understand. They think everything comes into their will, and that more and more we see more assets outside of a probate estate than within it. Good point.
The floor is yours.
I don't care which side. I'll go where you do.
As Diana mentioned, as if you need to be reminded, Kevin Smith I am, George Clooney I am not. So keep that in mind. But similar to Mac and Damien, we've come up with a number of scenarios that can be a catalyst for discussion on charitable giving and charitable planning. So what we'll do before each scenario is we'll give you a brief overview of kind of the main purpose and key takeaways, and then we'll get into the interaction. So in the first scenario, I think it's important to recognize that it's very rare for a client or potential client to come to a financial planner specifically to discuss charitable giving or charitable planning. It's not that it's not important, it's just that there's other things that often are higher priority initially. So things like retirement planning or portfolio strategy, whatever the case may be. So one of the avenues that many financial planners utilize is to gauge client interest and priorities is a questionnaire that they often will send out prior to an initial consultation. And in that questionnaire, a potential client is asked to provide statements and documents, whether it be assets or liabilities, a copy of a tax return. But there's also usually a checklist where they can indicate the areas that are most important to them and what's the most priority. And in that checklist, there might be categories like retirement planning, education planning, risk management, insurance, investment strategy, et cetera. But also there's a section on charitable giving. And if a potential client checks those boxes, then you know right away that there needs to be a dialogue to take place. So that's kind of the backdrop to this first scenario, and we'll kind of get into how that interaction might unfold. Diana, thank you again for completing the questionnaire. I know a lot of time and effort went into that. It was very helpful to me to get a better visual picture of what your current financial situation looks like. I know we spent a lot of time already talking about some of your highest priority items, specifically retirement planning and your portfolio strategy in that regard. But I also noticed that you did also indicate that charitable giving is a priority, and you checked off the boxes specifically to explore tax advantage charitable giving strategies, and you also know that you'd like to incorporate charitable giving in your overall financial plan. So obviously that's important to you. So can you tell me a little bit more briefly about that?
Yep. Yeah, we do think it's important to give back. We've been very blessed, and so we feel that it's important to share with those less fortunate. Our biggest donations have been, of course, to our church, and that's the only formal program that we have, but we do give to several other charities as well, but we don't have it as like a formal part of our plan. We just haven't thought that far at this point.
So annual gifting has been important to you, and also is it part of your overall estate plan at this point?
Actually, yes, we did. As Mac said, people have redo their wills when they have children and then when their children are grown. So we have just redone our will now that our children are grown. We have a very big extended family, and so what we did as part of our estate plan is if our kids aren't there to receive our assets, that then instead of going to this vast extended family, that our assets go to charity.
Well, obviously, this is a very important topic, and I want to give it its proper time and attention. And I want to be sensitive to your time, because we've already talked about a lot of areas already. You're probably a little overwhelmed with all the material in this initial meeting. But because this is so important, what I would suggest we do is, why don't we arrange a subsequent meeting specifically to talk charitable giving. What I'd like to do is maybe get more in depth in terms of what your priorities are in that regard. We could talk about your lifetime gifting program and also how maybe you've incorporated charities into your estate. But there are a variety of avenues available in terms of lifetime gifts and testamentary or gifts as part of bequests, et cetera, that possibly could be some refinements and improvements to your overall plan. But again, it is very important, and I'd like to spend a little bit more time on that. So if you're okay, why don't we set up a subsequent meeting and we'll get into that in more depth.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks.
So again, the main purpose here is to kind of plant the seeds, because there's a lot of ground usually covered in that initial meeting, and you're not going to cover everything. And usually by the time we get to these other items, a lot of times clients' eyes are going to glaze over because they're just overwhelmed because we covered a lot of these things ahead of time. But we certainly want to address it if they've indicated. It's obviously very important. But really, it's a topic that, in my mind, warrants its own meeting to really get into in greater depth. Any questions?
What would be your suggestion, since many people who are first being introduced to this topic are not going to have a clue what you're talking about when you say testamentary and some of these other technical terms? What would your suggestion be to not confuse them and have them shaking their head yes when they really don't know?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is obviously we want to be very sensitive to using terms that a client can relate to. I think a lot of times there's a tendency, whether it be financial planners or other professionals, where we talk a language that is confusing, and that's not, going to do any good whatsoever. So we certainly need to use the right terminology. I think a lot of times in that subsequent meeting, again, you're planting the seeds, but you want to get in a little bit more depth in terms of the various techniques available, but obviously explain them in a way that they can relate to and understand without using confusing terminology. And just using analogies or different real-life scenarios sometimes can explain those concepts.
Maybe give an example, because I suspect there are some people in this room, we're all guilty in this field of perhaps using that kind of language. So maybe you have an example.
Yeah, I think, for example, the term testamentary is not very common to many people, though it's very common in the professional world. I think it's really just explaining, like, as part of your will or as part of your estate plan upon death, there's ways of supporting charity, but there's also ways to support charity during your life through annual giving programs that many people take advantage of. So I think it's just being aware that some of the terminology that we might think is customary from our vantage point professionals is not going to be so widely known with the individuals we're reaching out to and discussing this with. So just having on the radar that we've got to speak in their language, not in our language.
And I think the point that Kevin made is, like, each meeting can get very overwhelming when you talk about all these things, but if we tend to, okay, we focus on retirement planning, then we focus on something else, then we focus on estate planning, and in that meeting, where we might have used terms that they didn't really understand ahead of time, in that meeting we kind of bring it down to everyone's level and get into more details on that specific topic.
One thing that I like that Matt said, and I want to kind of build on that with your conversation was, you said, are you involved with any charities? And you have there's some charities that you support. And I know as a plan giving person, there's a stigma that reaching out to a charitable organization when you have an interest in giving any kind of gift, either before death or after death, clients and donors are so afraid of what the ramifications of reaching out would be. Are they going to harass me? Are they going to be, bother me with more mail or this or that and other thing? So I think from a charity's perspective, we would love to have them reach out to us, and for you to understand that our role is to make sure that that does not happen. I mean, our role is, they're VIPs to us, and we want our relationship with them to be very special, personal, and to make sure that they're, taken care of in a very special way. So, just wanted to let you know that we love having those conversations with people that are interested in our organization.
Just to follow it up and maybe a little different twist, it's interesting to hear both of your sets of role plays because very emotionless. It's a very kind of neutral, disinterested role that you guys are playing in those conversations. And I think about us, those of us who are in fundraising represent a mission. So we're usually talking at a more emotional level with these friends and supporters. So as I look on your conversation, I think that's a really critical role that you're allowing. We say we really want the best for our client. We can't hide the fact that we are representing the mission. I think what a lot of us would say is if somebody expresses interest in helping the charity in a conversation we have with the donor, we like to say that if that donor's interest is clearly with some other mission, we would affirm and bless and kind of introduce them to that other mission. And I've seen that happen. And I really appreciate when that happens. But I just want to acknowledge that we have these different roles, and it's useful to see, just thinking if I were in that seat, how different the conversation.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, we have to maintain that disinterested third party and really just kind of get conversations started even between spouses on what their thoughts are and kind of let the conversation roll from there.
And I think, and Mac and I talked about it before, that you want to bring up and this is the hardest part of it, is bringing up that charitable thing, but you also have to know when to back off, because there are certain people who want nothing to do with that. And in our role, if we push that way, that could change our relationship completely, right? So it's being that delicate line of how do you bring this up to them without saying, okay, so who are you going to give all your money? It's finding that, and if they leave you that opening, you have an opening, right? But if they don't, it's backing. It's the same thing as you said of saying, okay, we respect. It's sort of backing away and then changing the direction there.
And part of that is educate. I had a couple last week that have, I think, literally about 13 or 14 charities in their wills. They leave everything at the second death to these charities. And about half of those charities were different in each will. And about half of them were the same. And when I talked to them, they had not conceptualized that whoever dies second wins, right? They got to live longer, and B, there's a swing of half of their estate going to different charities that they couldn't agree on. And so to me, when I sit there, it was like a light bulb went off. And then they reformatted everything to parse it out so that they covered all their charities. But that was a simple 5-minute explanation that they never got. So you have to take time to explore that.
We have clients who have done the same thing.
Yep.
And I think they're okay with whoever
Yes.
dies second wins.
Yep.
But that's the challenge.
Yeah.
That's what they're going for.
Well, the next scenario, another catalyst for engaging in discussion on charitable giving is really just a review of the tax return. There's a lot of information you can determine from that, specifically looking at the itemized deductions. So anyone who has a history of making annual gifts to charity, they're going to take a charitable write-off, and you can see whether they're making cash gifts or donating property. And that can lead into some good dialogues, not just in terms of the client's interest in terms of charity and supporting worthwhile causes, but also if they're donating effectively. And you get into donations of appreciated securities versus cash donations, et cetera. So that's what this next interaction is going to be about. Diana, I reviewed your tax return, and again, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I noticed that you do have a variety of itemized deductions, including some tax-deductible charitable donations. So can you tell me a little bit more about your charitable inclinations and some of the organizations you'd like to support in that regard?
Okay. Yeah, well, as you saw from my tax return, the biggest recipient of our charitable donations is my church. But you'll also see things on there. Financial literacy for young people is very important to me, so we donate each year to Junior Achievement, and also helping those who are less fortunate than us is important also. So you'll find contributions to the food bank and different organizations like that. We do have our company is an S corporation, so our charitable contributions also flow through to our corporate charitable contributions also flow through to us on our personal tax returns. So you'll see those sorts of things listed there too.
Well, it's wonderful you support so many worthwhile organizations where they really appreciate your generosity. And I did notice that most of your gifts are gifts of cash, and that's the most common way that people give to charities. They simply write a check each year. Many people don't realize, however, that might not be the most effective way to make annual gifts. Specifically, I noticed in reviewing your financial statements that you do have a number of highly appreciated securities. In fact, there was one stock, for example, I see that your original acquisition cost for tax purposes, you contributed $5,000. It's now doubled in value. It's worth $10,000. So you got a nice $5,000 gain there. If you were to ultimately liquidate that investment, you're going to have a capital gain, and you'll have about 15% tax liability on that appreciation. So you've got about a $750 embedded tax bill. One avenue you might want to consider going forward is, rather than writing those checks to charities each year, for your more sizable gifts, maybe donate that appreciated stock instead. So, for example, if you typically write a check for $10,000 to a particular organization, maybe donate $10,000 of that stock. The charity is tax exempt, so they can liquidate that $10,000, pay no tax, and meanwhile you've eliminated that $750 embedded tax liability. So that might be something to keep in mind going forward.
Okay, I understand. That does sound like a good idea, but my most appreciated stock is my York Water stock. You're asking me to sell that, and my parents gave that to me as a wedding gift like 30 years ago, and I don't know that I can do that.
I totally understand. I mean, York Water is a great company, great local business. It's done very well for you over the years, and certainly can understand and respect the emotional attachment as well. But there's actually a way you can maybe have the best of both worlds. So, for example, well, here's how this might work. So, normally you might contribute $10,000 to a charity each year, and you write that check. But there's obviously cash in that account to cover that check when it clears, right?
Right.
Well, what you could do instead is donate the $10,000 of stock, still get the tax deduction, as you would otherwise. But now, since you like the stock, want to hold on to it, take that $10,000 that otherwise would have been used to clear that check, and actually contact your financial advisor and have them go out and purchase the equivalent number of shares of York Water stock. Now what you've done is you're exactly where you were before, but you've eliminated that tax liability. So that tax basis, which originally was $5,000, now those shares have a tax basis of $10,000. So when you later dispose of those shares, you will have no tax consequence. So again, kind of the best of both worlds.
I guess that makes sense. All right, let me think about it.
All right.
I
Well,
might part
keep
with it.
that in mind. I know it's a lot to digest, but
Yeah.
we'll consider that and discuss that further down the road.
Okay, all right, we'll think about it. Thanks.
Okay, main purpose or takeaway here again, obviously reviewing the tax return, you get a lot of good information. But many times you find that as far as annual gifting, the most common way is to write a check. Okay, but it's often not the most efficient, especially in situations where one has a lot of investments that have gone up in value over time. And just a simple dialogue on those techniques sometimes can plant the seeds to leverage their gifting more effectively. Gets some a little bit more technical there in explaining some of the tax issues involved, but does everyone understand kind of the premise there, or any questions in that aspect? And just curious, from the nonprofit world, do you find, probably typically most of your gifts are just gifts of check? I mean, do many people actually donate Appreciate Securities, or is that more limited? Some?
Less now than
Hopefully more.
Well, they
going
should be
forward.
back.
Yeah,
The
they should be
games
back.
should be back.
Now.
Okay, the last scenario, another great catalyst for financial planners to discuss charitable giving, is at the time when one turns 70 and a half and they have to start taking required minimum distributions from their retirement accounts. And many people don't realize that there can be some consequences in terms of the amount of their Social Security that might be taxable, the amount of Medicare Part B premiums that might be paid, which is all income-based. And so anyone who has charitable intentions, it's a great way at that point to discuss what's known as a charitable rollover or a qualified charitable distribution. So that's what this next interaction is about. So Diana, congratulations for just attaining age 70 and a half. That's a very important milestone.
I've had some work done.
Well, as you may or may not know, once you reach that magical age, we have to start taking what's known as minimum required distributions from your tax-deferred retirement accounts, including your IRAs. Whether you need the money or not, the money has to come out of your retirement accounts, and it is taxable for federal income tax purposes. There is no Pennsylvania tax on retirement distributions, but it does result in additional taxation for federal purposes, which we want to plan for.
Okay. I know, it's really frustrating because I don't really need additional income now, but I guess there's worse problems I could have, but I just wish there was something we can do. Is there anything we can do from a tax standpoint to help me avoid some of these taxes?
There may be. Let me ask you this, if you don't mind me asking.
Okay.
Do you have any charitable intentions at all? Do you typically gift money to your church or any local organizations as part of an annual giving plan? Is that something that's important to you?
Yeah, in fact, I have money just automatically come out of my checking account every month to go to my church.
Great. Well, actually, there actually may be some possibilities then where we can reduce some of that tax burden.
Okay.
Because you indicated you really don't need this money. It's got to come out of
No.
the retirement account, and you do have charitable intentions, the organization you support. Have you ever heard of what's called a charitable rollover or a qualified charitable distribution?
I don't think so.
Okay.
What is that?
Here's the mechanics. Here's how this works. Anyone who's over the 70 and a half that has to take minimum distribution for their retirement accounts, if they have charitable intentions, they can have that check from their IRA payable directly to the charity or charities that they support.
Okay.
That distribution counts towards the minimum distribution requirement. So say you have $10,000 of charitable gifts you'd like to make, typically as part of your annual giving program. If your minimum distribution is also, in this example, $10,000, we have it come right out of your IRA to the charities you support. That $10,000 will count as part of your minimum distribution. You satisfy that requirement.
Oh, okay.
Now, you don't get a tax deduction on that, but it's actually better than a tax deduction because it doesn't count as part of your income,
Oh,
which has the same net effect, essentially, of a deduction, but actually
Right.
even better because there's a lot of consequences that people don't realize when they take distributions from their IRAs in terms of the impact, if it were taxable, on things like Social Security and Medicare Part B premiums.
Oh.
So to give you an example, Medicare Part B premiums are based upon adjusted gross income, essentially. And your distributions from your IRAs are counted as part of adjusted gross income. And in many cases, folks have very sizable balances in their retirement accounts, so when they start those minimum distributions and count that as income, their Part B premiums previously that were a lot lower, they now all of a sudden find that they're paying, in some cases, a few $100 more per month
I've heard of that
in their
happening.
premiums.
Okay.
So that's one consideration. The other, which is more frequent and more common among many retirees, is the impact of taxation on Social Security benefits. Now, so if the tax code isn't complicated enough, I'll explain briefly how taxation of Social Security works. They do a calculation called provisional income. And what that is they take half of your Social Security benefits, and then they add to that all of your other taxable income. So it could be
Okay.
pension income, interest, dividends, retirement distributions. If that number, as a married taxpayer, is below $32,000, none of your Social Security is taxed at all.
Okay.
If it's between $32,000 and $44,000, then up to 50% of your Social Security is subject to taxation.
Okay.
And if it's above $44,000, up to 85% of your Social Security is subject to tax. Now, what that means is, in many cases, prior to taking their minimum distributions, there are many situations where one doesn't pay any tax on their Social Security because their income is very low. But once they have these distributions, now they're paying more tax than that they otherwise didn't have to be responsible for. So,
Okay.
for those who have charitable intent like you, by having those checks come out of your IRA, and we can do up to $100,000 per year,
Okay.
okay? We can have directly to charity, and now that's not counted in your income. Again, no tax deduction, but because it's not counted as income, you don't have all these other adverse consequences.
Okay. All right. That sounds like a really good idea.
In your situation, I think it would be
Yeah,
ideal.
it's the same money. So I can just have my IRA distribution go directly to the
Correct.
church each month instead of coming from my checking account, right?
Correct. Now, what you might want to do, we could do it monthly, but it might be better just to, there's paperwork every time you do a
Okay.
distribution.
Okay.
So it might be advisable to maybe just tally
Do
up
it
what you
once
typically
a
do.
year?
Exactly. you
Okay.
know, and we can certainly accommodate that.
Okay.
And something else to keep in mind is I'm not sure in the past, it looks like you've typically taken itemized deductions, but in some cases, some clients don't have enough to itemize. And in that case, their charitable donations are not giving them any benefit whatsoever. So they're ideal candidates as well to do a distribution from the IRA. And I know you mentioned as well a potential interest in making a sizable gift as part of a capital campaign.
Yes, yes.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about
Well,
that?
yeah, at our church periodically, we'll be doing some sort of building project or something, and a capital campaign comes up. In fact, we're working on one now that I've pledged several $1,000s a year to for the next so many years. So I could just take this as an additional distribution, is what you're telling me, and it can go directly to the charity?
Absolutely. Up to $100,000 per year. And there's
Okay.
another issue for sizable gifts. You run this a lot with capital campaigns where in some cases people are donating $50,000, $100,000 or more. There are limits on how much one can deduct on their tax return. You can only take for cash gifts, only 50% of your adjusted gross income is deductible in any given year.
Okay.
So someone that has a $50,000 adjusted gross income and makes, say, a $100,000 sizable capital campaign gift, they're limited to only $25,000 of a deduction in that given year. The other $75,000 they can carry over into future tax years, and they only have a 5-year period where they can use up those deductions. So another great example of for those sizable contributions, use that IRA instead to get the full benefit right away, and then it also would reduce the impact of future minimum distributions, which alleviates some of the
Okay.
impact we talked about earlier in terms
Okay.
of Social Security and Medicare premiums.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot to
All right.
digest.
I was going to say, this is starting to go over my head.
So, but
we can talk about it each year
absolutely.
as we do things.
Absolutely.
Okay,
I think that'd be a
great.
great avenue for you to explore in more depth.
Great. Thank you.
A lot of detail there, but hopefully you get the idea of the main issues.
Now, you're allowed to give $100,000 of your required minimum distribution, but if you don't have a required
Actually, anyone who's over 70 and a half can do up to $100,000, even if their minimum distribution is lower than that. You can always do more than the minimum up to $100,000 annual ceiling.
Do
No.
you have to pay a penalty on it if you're pulling more than the requirement?
No.
No. And again, so it's another very overlooked way of supporting charity. Like people overlook often the appreciated assets, but this new rule with the charitable contributions, it used to be temporary and had to renew it each year. Now it's permanent. So in my mind, anyone who has charitable intent who makes annual gifts to church or any organization, and they have an IRA, they're over 70 and a half, there's no reason not to satisfy that from the IRA because it reduces their income and it avoids all these other potential unintended consequences.
Go ahead.
Can you use that IRA, can you use that towards a charitable gift? Could it only be outright gift?
If it goes directly to the charity, I guess you could probably, okay, I was going to say, there's probably some technical rules there.
There's a
So,
lot of talk about it, but they still have said no.
A lot of money is tied up in 403Bs or 401Ks. You want to comment on rolling those over in that IRA so that this channel can be used?
yeah, a great question. A lot of times you do find that folks have 401Ks or other qualified retirement accounts, and the minimum distribution rules still apply, but you can't commingle. So they've got to take a distribution out of those plans, and if they have IRAs, they've got to take a separate distribution there. So one potential benefit, they could roll the 401K into an IRA, still subject to the same minimum distribution rules, but then you could do the charitable rollovers from the IRA, and it opens up the door. I mean, just consolidating can have some benefits as well, potentially. So that's a potential great avenue for folks to simplify their financial lives, but more effectively maybe leverage those gifts to charity as well.
Okay. All right, I think we're about out of time. Thank you all for coming. Tom, you want to say a couple of words?
Thanks, Diana. So I missed the chance to welcome you to Vista. How many of you have been here before? So this is our experiential learning laboratory. It's called J. Vistown for 5th over 6th grade students. This is our 16th year in this building, so it's kind of hard to believe that we've been here this long and that it looks this good. We had students here yesterday for the last day of this year. So students come for one day and literally get a chance to run this community by themselves for the day. They spent about 19 lessons in the classroom, teacher taught, getting ready for the day. So they learned about community, about what jobs. They've actually filled out job applications, interviewed for jobs, learned about payroll taxes and payroll checks, learned how to write checks, deposit slips. So by the time they come to Vistown for the day, they've really done a lot of work to get ready. So it's not a field trip in the traditional sense. It's really a chance to come and be a citizen. We had Steve Schmidt from JUSA here yesterday, and he had a chance to walk around with me as we were touring. And what I said to Steve was that JF South Central Pennsylvania has the best Vistown in the world. Now, there's only 25, so it's not like we're in a lot of competition, but what makes our Vistown really special is nothing that you would see here is pretend. So everything the students are doing is real. We manufacture screen printed t-shirts, and Steve watched a young 6th grader making screen printed t-shirts yesterday. We produce a TV show that's on the internet that night. We have a meteorologist that does a weather report. So it's an opportunity for students to really get hands-on and get a chance to really participate in that program. This year we brought in about 8,000 students, so we're probably close to 100,000 students now that have come through this program. I was fortunate as a board member back before I joined the staff to go to Indianapolis, Indiana, and in fact it was 1999. There's a brick over there that says 2002 is when we opened, so it kind of reminds me of it. Bob Kinsley loaned us the plane, and we flew over to take a look at that time, what was the second Vistown in the United States. And we were in, kind of like Steve was yesterday, watching the city run. And I walked up to a parent volunteer and I said, so what do you think? And this guy got this giant smile on his face. And he said, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And he points to the bank, which is over here. And he said, my son's been working in the bank today. And he said, I can't tell you how much he's learned from this program. And, I'm nodding my head. I mean, I get it. I can see it. I know exactly what you're saying. He said, I got to tell you, I've learned more than he has. And I literally went, what? That's the stupidest thing. I didn't say that. That's what I was thinking. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. You've learned more than he has. He said, no, I'm serious. He said, as a parent, I've spent all my time telling my kids what to do. Do this and don't do that. What I learned today, if I'll just step back and ask a couple questions, they're perfectly capable of figuring it out on their own. And I went like, whoosh, it was like an epiphany moment. I tell this story every time I'm with business people. It was amazing to me to think that in addition to 8,000 students, we show parents 1,000 a year the capacity that their children have to do great things. I talked to Dr. Connie Campbell, who's the woman who developed this program in Kansas City, Missouri. And I said, what in the world were you thinking? Why in the world did you think of doing this? And she said, we were trying to find a way to show teachers how to teach. Because we believe that experiential learning, right, is the most powerful tool in the universe for how we all learn. And if we can help teachers and educators better understand the power that's there. So we built this laboratory, and they call it a laboratory, to help teachers see it. So in addition to 8,000 students, 1,000 parents, we bring about 200 teachers through this program every single year. So it's a great opportunity for us to showcase kind of what Junior Achievement is all about. I'm going to end with just a quote. Lin-Manuel wrote probably one of the greatest plays of modern times in Hamilton. And in his words, that I think it was Eliza, Alexander Hamilton's wife, after he's died, one of the quotes she says, when my time is up, have I done enough? And we use that at Junior Achievement to kind of help us understand, have we done enough? And so I can't tell you how I appreciate your role in this journey to really help our community, each of us as individuals, answer that question, have we done enough? And it's a profound question that we ought to ask ourselves kind of every single day. Because as we all know, life is pretty short, and we get a chance to do this kind of one time. And so I leave you with that thought. We are extremely proud of what we do here at Junior Achievement. We're 62 now because we merged with Lancaster. This coming year, we're going to reach 100,000 students with our programs, kindergarten through 12th grade. We put 8,000 volunteers into classrooms. So we're a volunteer delivery system. We use the volunteer, Diana and Damien. We got a lot of, even JA volunteers. We're looking for more volunteers. So if you want to have fun working with students, just contact us and we'll help you out.
All right.
Good enough? Thank you much.
Very good. Thanks, Tom. Okay, thank you all for coming.
Remember how we were saying how usually it goes like much longer than what we think it will?
Yeah, we had no problem filling time. We went